So in this session, we will discuss Spring Boot project structure and start class. Yes, no? So when we create Spring Boot applications, yes, no? When we create Spring Boot starter project, by default, we will get boot start class. Okay, let's watch here. I have created suppose a Spring Boot application. Okay. Suppose I have created a Spring Boot application. In this Spring Boot applications, let's suppose I create any Spring Boot application. How we can create a Spring Boot application? So to create a Spring Boot application, we are using STSID. Yes, no? This is STSID. We open this STSID. Okay. If you want to create Spring Boot applications, so now we need to go to the file. We have file option and file menu. Go to the file, and here we have apps Spring Starter project. We require to click on Spring Starter project. So click on Spring Starter project. Now here you can give a project name, any project name. So suppose I give the project name My Spring First Application app. This is a project name. Now here we have two things. Watch here. One is a group ID. Another is a artifact ID. Artifact ID is just similar to the project name. Yes, no? So what is the artifact ID for this project? My Spring First app. Now here we need to click on next button. We need to click on next button. And now watch here. Here all the dependencies are available which we required in our project. You can search here the dependencies which are required in your application. So by default, here we require to use one dependency to create a Spring Boot application, Spring Web. Which dependencies? Spring Web. So now we select the Spring Web dependencies. So Spring Web dependencies. Okay. My first. Okay. Let's suppose again we are created. Now project is cancels. Go to the Spring Starter project. I give the project name. What is the project name? Suppose My First Spring App. Now click on next button. Now here we need to select the dependencies. So which dependency we are selecting is Spring Web. Now click on next button. And then finally we require to click on finish button. So last time I have discussed how we can create a Spring Boot application. To create a Spring Boot application, we have Spring Initializer. Yes, no? Watch here. STSID actually embedded this website URL. Yes, no? Okay, let's now click on finish button. So now it will create one Spring Boot project. My first Spring app. So last time I have discussed Spring Boot project we are created using Maven. So it follow one project structure also. Okay. So under that, watch here, you can check here. Under that project, we have one folder, src main Java, and we have folder src main resource, and we have folder src test Java. Yes, no? This is a Maven based project we have created, and this Maven, we have main file that is a pom.xml file. This is a project object model file. This is a pom.xml file. Watch here. In this files, here we are specify all the dependencies which have required for our project. So you can check here in this pom.xml file, we have dependencies section. This is a dependencies section. Under the dependencies section, we have dependency. So first of all, watch here. Here we are using which dependencies. Each dependency contains what? One group ID and artifact ID. Yes, no? Okay, here we are using Spring Boot Starter Web dependency. What is the artifact ID? Spring Boot Starter Web. And what is the group ID? Is org.springframework.boot. So this is the dependencies that we are added in our project. So in Maven based project, just we need to tell in the pom.xml, yes, this dependency we have required under dependency sections. So it will automatic download it and configure the dependency in my project. So now watch here. Here we also have one dependency. Yes, no. Spring Boot starter test. We have using another dependencies. So under dependency section, we can configure our dependency. We can tell which dependency is required in our project. Now, when you open this project, you can check here. Okay, 1 minute. I just okay. So this is my project. Now, if you want to update this project, right click on this project, and here we have option Maven. Yes, you know. Now on this option, we can click update project. Now we can click on update project. Now we are updating our project. You can check here, it will automatic downloaded all the dependencies whatever required. Now project is created. Okay. In this project, now open the SRC main Java folder. Under this folder package, watch here we have one class. By default, one class is created. By default, one class is created. Which class? My first Spring application. Okay, open this class. So now watch here. This is the main class. And now you can check here. This class contains main method. Public static void main. Public static void main. This class contains main method also. So when you create a Spring Boot project, so when we create a Spring Boot starter project, by default we will get boot start class. Which class is known as boot start class? This class is known as boot start class. This class contains main method. And now the class, this class is also annotated by using which annotation? At the rate Spring Boot application annotation. What is the at the rate Spring Boot application annotation? I will discuss this thing also in later on. But watch here, this is a boot start class. Boot start class always annotated at the rate Spring Boot application annotations. And boot start class contain the main method. Okay. So what is the at the rate Spring Boot application annotation? I we will discuss in later on. Okay, so when we create a Spring Boot starter project, by default we will get boot start class. So Spring Boot application execution will begin from the start class only. Yes, no? Spring Boot application execution will start from start class only. This is a start class. If you want to run this Spring Boot applications, so what you need to do? You need to select this class and run right click, go to the right and run as. And watch here. Here we have option Spring Boot application. Now click on Spring Boot applications. So now watch here. Your application is started, but your application is failed. Why? Now watch here. Why application is failed? Web server failed to start 8080 was already in use. On this port number actually already used. So Tomcat server is started. Watch here. Spring Boot have the facility embedded server. Yes, no? So already one service is running on 8080 port number. We require to change the port number. Where we can change the port number? So in Spring Boot application, we have one SRC main Java resource folder. Okay, watch here. We have one folder SRC main resource. Under this folder, we expand this folder. Under this folder, we have one file that is application.properties file. Okay, whatever resources we have required our application to run, all the resources we have required to place under SRC main resource folder. Under this folder, we have application.properties file. This is a very important file. We will discuss in later on in great detail about application.properties files. Actually, in this file, under this file, we can specify our configurations. Just like suppose I require to change the port number. So what you can do, just write down the property name server dot port. Server dot, we want to change the port number. What port number? Suppose I say 8090. I'm change the port number. Now again run this application. If you want to run this application, select this application, right click, run as, and here we have Spring Boot application. So what is selection does not contain main method. Which is the main class? This is the main bootstrap class. Yes, no? Spring Boot starter class. Now select the starter class, click on Spring Boot applications. Now you can check here. Now application is Bootstrap. You can check here, application start the Bootstrap. So now your application is started. Yes or no? You can read here, Spring Boot application is started. Okay, at which port number? 8090. So this is a Bootstrap class. This is a starter class. So Spring Boot application execution will begin from the start class only. From where Spring Boot application execution is start? Spring Boot application execution start from the start class. Which class is known as start class? The class which is annotated. The class which is annotated at the rate Spring Boot application annotation, and class which contains main method, that class is known as boot start class. What is at the rate boot applications, Spring Boot application? That part I will discuss, don't worry. So Spring Boot application execution will begin from the start class only. This boot class contains main method. You can check here. Boot class always contains what? Main method. Which class is known as boot class? The class which contain main method. Boot classes means the class, which class we can call as a boot class. From that class the application execution will start. From which class application execution Spring Boot application start? That class is known as boot class. Boot class contains what? Boot class always contains main method. You can check here. Boot class what contain main method. Boot class contain main method. Inside this main method, you can check here one line point. Here we have Spring application. Spring application is a class. You can check here. This is a built-in class. Spring application. This is a class. Spring application. This is a class. In this class, we have one method, that is a run method. We have run method. Spring application is a class. In the class, we have run method. Run is a static method. A static method we can call using class name. So run is a static method, and which is present in a Spring application. So that's why we are calling this method using class name. What is the class name? Spring application dot run. Now you can check here. This class, this method take as a parameter what? This this method will take parameter as a class name. Which class you need to bootstrap? From where application execution is start. My first Spring application class name here we are passing. Now second parameter, what it will take? It will take arguments. Whatever, if you are passing any command line argument, that argument it will receive. So remember these points. What point you have to remember? Boot class contains main method. Boot class contains main method which calls Spring application dot run method. You can check here. This is a boot class which contain main method, and boot class contains main method which call Spring application dot run method. Clear my point? Any confusion? Anybody have doubt? Please ask. Okay, so what is a start class in Spring Boot? Start class means you can check here. Start class what contain? Start class contain run method. Yes, no? Start class contain main method. Inside main method, we are calling the run method. Run method is a static method which is present in Spring application class. Yes, no? So we are calling run method using Spring application class. So run method actually it is used to run boot application. It is a entry point for the boot application execution. Inside start class, we will have the main method. It will call Spring application dot run method. A run method actually performs Spring Boot application bootstrapping. Inside run method have become logic where we are performing Spring Boot application bootstrapping. So Spring Boot will read our class path starter, and Spring application class is used to bootstrap and launch Spring application from the Java main method. Okay, who responsible to launching the Spring Boot application from the Java main method? Spring application class. Spring application class called the run method. Inside run method, we have logic to bootstrap the Spring Boot applications. So Spring application class is used to bootstrap and launch Spring application from the Java main method. By default, class will perform the following steps to bootstrap your application. So you can check here Spring application data run, yes, no, and here we pass the class name. That class act as a bootstrap from which class we need to start the execution. So it is used to boot application. It is the entry point, we can say. In simple word, we can say it is the entry point for your boot application execution. Inside starter class, we will have main method that will call Spring application dot run method. Run method perform Spring Boot application bootstrapping. Okay. So what is the return type of the run method? Okay. Run method, what return actually? Okay, after bootstrapping the application, run method return a container, IOC container reference. What is a container actually? Okay, let's first of all we understand what is a container. Then we will use IOC container. What is a IOC container? Okay, IOC container, what meaning of the IOC container? Let's try to understand. Suppose in Java we have defined any class. I'm supposed to define demo class. Who is responsible to create an object of this class? As a programmer, we are responsible to create an object of the class. Yes, no? If you require demo class object, so we require to write the logic for creating the demo class object. Yes or no? So let's suppose we have class car class. Inside car class, let's we have engine. We are using engine object also. Okay, now we have class engine. Okay. Now, who is responsible to create the logic for car class, and car class also required engine object? Who is responsible? Who is responsible to creating the object? Programmer responsible. Programmer need to write the logic for creating the car object. Along with programmer need to write the logic for gathering the engine object. But now come into the IOC container. What means of IOC? IOC stands for inversion of control. What means of inversion of control? Inversion of control means the inverting the control of creation of object from the user. Suppose you require car object. Who is responsible? You are responsible. Suppose you are building a house. Understand this point. You're building the house. In your house, you have required door object. So one is the way you can create a door from the scratch inside a house. But another way, okay, another way, we are not creating the door object from the scratch inside the house. Someone pushing, yes or no, someone pushing from outside door object inside the house. This means just we are purchasing the door from outside instead of creating door object inside the house from the scratch. So it is a better way, na? We have required door. So just we are go to the market and we are purchasing the door object. This door object will be created by the external, some outsider. Yes, no? Outsider responsible to create the door object. We are not responsible to create the door object. Who is responsible? Outsider responsible to creating the door object. And we have required door object. Just inject the door object inside a house instead developing from the scratch. Okay, now that meaning of the inversion of control. Inversion of controls means, which means that inverting the control of creation on object from the user to some external source, and external source is responsible to injecting the dependencies to our application is known as IOC container. Okay, in our application, suppose we have required door objects. So we have required door object. We have not created. We have not required to create the door object. Someone external, yes, no, will provide the door object, and we can use this door object and inside application directly. So what means of IOC? IOC stands for inversion of control, which means that inverting the control of creation of an object from the user to some external source. That external source is responsible to injecting the dependencies to our application is known as IOC container. Okay, let's understand what is IOC container. Okay, when you define a classes, just like in core Java, you defining a classes, yes, no? Who is responsible for creating the object for those classes? Programmer. Suppose we have defined one entity, student entity, we define one customer entity, we define employee entity, yes, no? We have the person entity. So who is responsible to create the object for those entity? Programmer is responsible, yes, no? So, but in case of IOC container, suppose we have different entity object we have required. We have required object. So container, what does actually container responsible to create this on object? Programmer not responsible. Now container will create those object and will store into one place. Container, what does container will create all the bean objects, whatever beans required in your application, and will place into one place. Okay, let's suppose sometimes maybe one bean is dependent on another bean and one bean required another bean. Just like suppose we have car bean, we have class car, we have engine class, yes, no, class engine. So now we are not required to create car class bean. Now we are not required to create engine class bean. So who will responsible? Container will create a bean object for those bean. And but here car class also required which bean? Car class required engine bean. So now container will correlate also. Container will correlate also. Container will provide engine bean to the car objects. Okay. So watch here. How container do? Container what does? Container read the beans, whatever beans required in your application. And it requires some configurations about that bean. Yes, no? Based on the requirement, it will create automatic all those beans which are required for your application. Okay, now once bean is created, now you can use those beans directly in your application code. So now you have not required to take care of creation the object of the class. You are only responsible to using the object of the class. Who will responsible? Now whenever you require any class object, who will provide? Container will provide. Yes, no? Container will create automatic. Yes, no? All the bins which are required in your application and will place in one place. And now you can use directly your that bins in your applications. Whatever bin you have required, you can use directly. So how container create? Okay. So Spring container, what does? Spring container read all the Java Pojo classes, take all the Java Pojo classes for which object needs to be created. Now along with it requires some con metadata. Yes, no? For each bean, yes, no? It requires some metadata. So metadata you can pass in the form of XML, yeah, annotation, yeah, Java based metadata. Now based on that, it will create all the beans and now you can use those beans, those objects in the application directly. So now all the object is ready to use in your application. That is known as container. What is the responsibility of the container? In a Spring, IOC container responsible to create an object. Yes, no? You are not required to take care of object creations. So container will create the objects. You can check here. Container will create the objects, wire them together, configure them, and manage their complete life cycle from creation till destruction. Now, who will responsible to creating and managing the life cycle for an object? Container will take care. So now we are not required to take care. Whenever we have required any object, we can use directly in your application. Container will take care all those things. Container will create the object, wire them together, configure them, and manage their life cycle, complete life cycle from creation till destruction. This is a IOC container. So what is a IOC container? IOC is container. IOC is a principle. Yes, no, we can say which is manage and collaborate differences among the object in the application. A process by which object define their dependencies and external container inject those dependencies into the object. The object need not to worry about where its dependencies are coming from. Just like suppose car class require engine dependencies, yes, you know. So you have not required to take care where where engine dependencies comes. Yes, no, automatic container, what that it will provide a car object to the engine object. Okay, container will take care. Yes, no, container scene. Yes, car is required. Which dependencies? Car required engine dependencies, engine object. So container will create engine object and will provide to the car class. Yes, you know. So this is a IOC principle. IOC means nothing. It is a principle. IOC is a principle which is used to manage and collaborate dependencies among the object in the applications. Yeah, we can say a process by which object defines their dependencies and external container inject those dependencies into the object. The object need not to worry about where its dependencies are coming from. Okay, how you can create IOC container? How IOC container will be created in the Spring Boot? IOC container will be created by the Spring Boot as part of the run method execution. You can check here as the run method execution. Yes, no? Run method will contain the logic to bootstrap the application. Once your application execution is started, and then it will return the, what is the return type of run method? You can check here. The return type of run method is a configurable application context. This returns run method return the IOC container reference. How you can create IOC container? IOC container will be created by the Spring Boot as part of run method execution. Okay, so I run method, actually what is the return type of the run method? You can check here. Run method return type is a Spring I configurable application context. This is the IOC container which represent the IOC container. Run method return the IOC container reference. So what is the name of the IOC container? Configurable. You can check here. Configurable. Okay, configurable. You can check here. Configurable. Configurable. Configurable application context. Configurable application. It is a container. Yes or no? It is a IOC container. That container responsible to managing and collaborating and wiring and the dependencies from creation till destruction. Container will manage the life cycle. Yes or no? Container will manage the life cycle of the bin from creation till destruction. So this is a container, we can say IOC container. I give the name as a container. Configurable application context. How you can create a container? IOC container will be created by the Spring Boot as part of the run method execution. In Spring Boot, we have three different approach to create IOC container. In the Spring Boot will read our class path from the starter file. So with watch here, one starter file I've added. You can check here. Go to the pom.xml file. Here we have dependencies. Spring Boot. I will show here. Yeah, Spring Boot starter web. This is the dependencies. Yes, sir? Spring Boot starter web. This dependencies is used to, if you configure these dependencies by default. Yes, sir? Spring Boot starter. Yes, no? Spring Boot starter. You can configure one of them dependencies. Okay. Spring Boot starter web flex in case of reactive programming. Spring Boot starter web in case of servlet programming, web application, and Spring Boot starter. This is the default dependencies. Okay, you can configure one of them dependencies to create IOC container. Okay, you can check here. Now come into the main class. So what it will return? It will return the IOC container reference. So what is the IOC container name? Configurable application context. What is the return type of the run method? Run method return the IOC container reference. That reference we are storing into this variable. Let's we are try to print the reference. So system.out.println. You can check a container. Okay. So now again run it. You can check. Okay. Now refresh it. You can check here. Okay. Now you can check here. What is the reference? org.spring.boot web application web.servlet.context annotation configurable application context. Okay. Now you can check here when Spring Boot application is started. Yes, and lot of bin will be created. Okay, you can check a container dot. Here we have method get bin definition. Okay, you can check here get bin definition count. Okay, you can check here this method what return the number of bins defined in this factory. Yes, no, how many bins already created, number of how many bins. Yes, no. So if you want to check get in definition count, so what it will return, it will return the number of bins that already created by the container. So now I'm take one variable count. Let's here we print number of bin, number of plus count. Okay, refresh it. You can check here. Okay, when application is started, yes, no, how many bins are created? 229. I'm not defining any bin, user defined bin. Yes, no. I'm not defining any user defined Java class. Yes, no. But when application is bootstrap, during the bootstrapping the application, container creates 229 bins. Yes, no. Lot of bin implicit is created. Okay. So this is a container. Okay. Container. Okay. Suppose I've created any bin. I require that bin object. You need to ask to the container. Container, you need to tell to the container. You can check here container dot get bin. You can check here we have method get bin method. You just tell to the name of the bin, which bin we have required. You have not required to create the object. It will provide that bin. Container will create all the bin which are required for our applications. And whenever you have required, you can ask, container will provide directly to you and you can use it directly. You have not need to take care of creation and destruction of the bin. Who will take the responsibility? Container will take the responsibility. So container will take the responsibility. Clear? So this is the IOC container. Clear? Any point, any confusion?